The following program contains sexual content and graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised. Today on Dr. Phil, inside a notorious religious sect,
The adults would have the children dance in lingerie.
the child survivors reunite
You say that you were taught that you need to be perfect.
We would get weighed every morning.
And if I got over 108, then I was going to hell.
to expose the abuses.
They had us performing sexual acts.
You were motivated to be raped because that was your ticket to heaven. Let's do it.
Have a good show, everybody. Here we go.
This is a safe place to talk about hard things.
Stand by. We'll count you down.
Today is going to be a changing day in your life.
5, 4.
Get ready to take care of you. Today, more than 30 years after being rescued from what detectives and prosecutors classified as a dangerous and abusive cult, the child survivors of the Zion Society reunite right here on our stage. Some are seeing each other in person for the first time since being rescued decades ago. Now, on the outside, the houses that made up the Zion Society looked well kept and normal. But survivors say hidden behind those doors was terrifying abuse. The group's leader, Arvin Shreve, claimed he was a prophet who heard the voice of God and that he and he alone had the power to save his followers from impending doom. The Zion Society compound in Ogden, Utah was raided in 1991. 30 of the victims rescued were children.
Prostituting children in the name of God. The already bizarre tale of Ogden's polygamous Zion Society. Members of the society have been in court on child sex abuse charges.
Arvin Shreve doesn't consider himself a prophet or even a religious leader. But during the past 2 decades, more than 60 followers have set up stakes and become part of his Zion Society. These Zionists accepted his guidance on everything from gardening to God. Zion Society leader Arvin Shreve called his religious teachings the sexual way of life. Prosecutors called it sexual exploitation and child abuse. Some people testified that Shreve is the most caring and spiritual man they know. Others told of a man who indoctrinated children into sex abuse and claimed divine knowledge at the same time he was soliciting prostitutes.
A young girl faced a crowded courtroom today to say she was sexually abused thousands of times.
They had games and books that would teach us about sex, she testified. You're taught that it's right, and if you don't, they take you into a room and talk you into it. At the age of 13, the witness says she became one of the wives of Zion Society leader Arvin Shreve.
It was scary, it was hard reliving it all, trying to remember everything. It was hard trying to convince what really happened because it is so bizarre.
The group's leader, Arvin Shreve, was sentenced just a few hours ago to at least 20 years in prison on 4 child sex abuse charges.
But investigators say there is indeed a lesson to be learned from Shreve.
I hope that it tells them all that there's just no place for whether they believe it's a religious reason or any other reason. There's just no reason to make a child a victim for something to satisfy their own needs.
The children were told that if they ever revealed the sexual abuse that was happening to them in the secret society, they would go straight to hell. But survivor Amber says, as an adult, she now realizes they were already living in hell.
When I was about 11 years old, my parents joined the Zion Society. My parents, they met the self-proclaimed prophet Arvin Shreve, and shortly after that, we moved into the group. They broke up the group into little mini families. Each of the men in the group would have their own harem of women and children, and they would call it a sister council. I was in Arvin's sister council. My parents were eventually thrown out of the group because my dad would argue with Arvin about anything, so I was left behind. Our daily life was really planned out for us. We would do our hair, do our makeup, do chores, garden, read scriptures. Everything was completely perfect on the outside. It was kind of like a Stepford wife situation. Hair was perfect, makeup was perfect, appearance was perfect. I would wear dresses every day, and we all dressed like we were going to church or something. When a girl joined the group, basically they would do a color wheel and tell you what color you were allowed to wear, how long your skirt should be. Even the younger children wore makeup. That was the thing. Perfection on earth. There were a lot of extreme, insane things going on, for sure. Arvin had a company where we would sell lingerie to the local strippers as a way to try to get them to come and join the group. So we would sew lingerie, the children all wore lingerie, and we would put on lingerie shows. There was a lot of sexual abuse in the cult. I was taught at a very young age that it was a privilege to have sexual relationship with Arvin. On special date nights, his wife would answer the door and she would give me like some refreshments and kind of warm me up before I had to go and meet Arvin alone. Arvin would explain that the reason that it was okay for him to have sexual relationships with children was that in heaven they were really older, and in heaven he was really younger. So he would like mix up the ages and make you feel like you really weren't the age that you were. This was a way that he could justify raping children. I'm trying to speak up today for the children that are still out there. I want to have a voice for the little girl that I was. Nobody should have to go through this ever.
Well, Amber, it's good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And you talk about this, by the way, and I'm so appreciative that you're willing to do so, because this kind of thing has never stopped. I mean, there are estimated to be 5,000 cults operating in the United States at any given time.
Right. Yeah.
So it's still happening. Now, you were separated from your parents when you guys went into the cult, right?
Yes.
They fragmented the family right away.
Right. As soon as we joined, they separated the children from the parents, and sometimes they would even like separate the parents. I was separated from my sisters and my parents and put in a different home with other people so that they could really like train me and teach me what they wanted me to know.
So they took away your foundation, they took away your ties, so you were isolated,
Yes.
which is the number one tool of the abuser, is to isolate their victim.
Right.
So they can start programming you and indoctrinating you.
Yes.
And what was that indoctrination?
Well, the main focus was that we were preparing for the end of the world.
This was pretty anti-government, right? This end
Very
of the world.
off the grid, anti-government. They would train us on what to say if we were to, get caught.
Right. And what did they tell you to say about the sex?
The children were taught to have sex with each other, and also the children were taught to have sex with the adults. The adults would teach the children how to have sex and then put us like in a room to have sex with each other. Or like they would even take us out in a car while the adults would sit in a car and with the headlights have the children dance in lingerie in front of the headlights for them, trying to teach us about what they call the sexual way of life.
And this was at what age?
11, 12, 13 was my age, but there were younger. And they taught us how to seduce, how to set up the environment for it. And we got a lot of praise and attention anytime we were to say a little sexual gesture or do something that seemed to be, sexy.
And what was the sexual way of life? What did that have to do with doomsday? How did they merge these two principal tenets?
Right. Well, Arvin, the self-proclaimed prophet, he would pick and choose who lived in which family, as ordained by God. He was ordained by God or whatever, supposedly, and God told him where to put each girl. And so he chose me for the Arvin group. And they're supposed to have sex with each other to stay bonded. I personally believe he was just trying to get us all so abused sexually from different people and types that it just became something we were numb to.
Right. So you would just be compliant.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No resistance. Well, coming up, Amber was 13 when she decided she had to save herself. She barely knew the alphabet, but she found a way to look up the letters CPS, Child Protective Services, and found out their number. We're going to find out what happened when she did that after the break. When you called CPS, what did you say to them?
We are being sexually abused, and just hurry and come quick. Gotta go by.
They didn't come rushing right out.
No.
And later, Andrea, you say you were abused weekly.
I was weighed every single day. If we didn't fall in that weight range, we wouldn't get called to go have sex. Then you didn't feel special, then you knew you were gonna go to hell.
Last month, 3 female members of the Zion Society pleaded guilty to child sex abuse charges. Authorities say all 3 women took part in lingerie shows to help convert new members to their way of life. But prosecutors say lingerie is the least of the group's worries.
The things going on are much more serious than simply dancing or putting on shows. There's regular sexual contact taking place between the men and women in the group and children.
Well, Amber was 11 years old when her adoptive parents joined the Zion Society. She says she was immediately separated from them and sent to live in a house filled with other young girls. She says when the young girls entered 52-year-old Shreve's home, it was considered normal to say hello before going into his bedroom and being raped by him. When you hear those words, what do you think?
When it happened, all I could do is stay awake all night long and I just stared at like the lace curtains all night long without moving, because after the abuse we would have to like sleep in the same bed with him for the rest of the night. So I would just lay frozen and stare at the curtains and wonder about like what life was like, you know, in the outside world.
And contact with the outside world was just forbidden, right? You weren't
right. We were also taken out of public school. I was taken out of public school in the 3rd grade, so my education stopped right when I entered the 3rd grade. All the way up until high school, I had no education. I just kind of like had to try to figure everything out for myself. But the lingerie shows, they would also do those where the children would dance in lingerie so that we could sell the lingerie to the local strippers who were like single moms and broken and in hopes of them joining.
Right. Did that ever happen?
I don't know, because I was just sent out to strip for them and do the little show, and then I was sent back across the street, and I couldn't talk to anybody from the outside world on my own.
Always chaperoned, always overseen by somebody else.
Everyone in the group had to always have somebody else with them, and for me, because I was a little bit of a what they call, trouble. I had 2 people with me all the time, 2 women.
How did you make this phone call, and what precipitated it?
Well, when I was a little girl and I was being really abused by my adopted family, I was given a rag doll by somebody who left it on my porch, and it said, with a little note that said, "From someone who loved you." So I took that rag doll, and it really meant a lot to me, and they took my doll away. And when they took the doll away, I completely, I just completely lost it. I felt stripped of everything. It made me mad. It made me angry. It made me feel like, okay, I tried to, I looked for the opportunity to get out. We were told, like, those thoughts, Arvin can hear those thoughts. And so I was really afraid. So I would try to, like, think the thoughts really fast, make a plan really fast, and then try to, like, clear my mind of all of it so that he couldn't read my mind. Because I thought he could read my mind.
He had indoctrinated you so much that if you thought something, he would know it.
Absolutely. They kept like extra tabs on me and would report back to Arvin often on me for things that I would want to do. As an example, when we got in there, they did a color wheel, and they would go over the color wheel and see what color God wants you to wear. And for me, it was peach. And I'm like, I hate peach. I don't want to wear peach. It's the worst color on me. I had to look to make sure if I'm wearing peach. But, and so every day I would have to wear something peach.
When you called CPS, they didn't come rushing right out.
No, and
What did you say to them?
I talked to them really fast. I said, "Hi, this is Amber. This is the address that I'm at, and we are being sexually abused here. We're supposed to be having sex with each other, and they're withholding food, and just hurry and come quick, and don't tell anybody that I called. Please, 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 just don't tell anybody. Got to go by," and hung up. And then I waited, and I thought, like, okay, they're going to be here any minute to come and save me. And it took weeks and weeks and weeks until somebody finally did show up. Yeah. And then when they did show up, the guys all came out again with guns and surrounded the social worker that came to get me, and they had to call the police and have a standoff in order for me to, get in the car and leave with social services.
We're going to add someone to the conversation when we come back. Natalie was also raised in the Zion Society, but she has a very different experience. She was Shreve's granddaughter, This is the first time she's sitting down with other survivors to tell her story. We'll talk to her when we come back.
Perfection was very important. So the more beautiful we were, the closer we were to God. The goal was a certain weight. My mother lived on carrot juice and ran 5 miles a day. We were told that God can't reach you through layers of fat.
At the base of northern Utah's majestic mountains, once upon a time, a little slice of heaven seemed to have tumbled down to earth.
You want me to destroy that camera for you?
Not very much, no.
Then get it out of here.
There's something going on. Nobody questioned it. Nobody dared.
But behind the beautiful gardens and immaculate facades in one quiet suburb about 40 miles north of Salt Lake City, something far from heavenly was taking place.
He's taking their souls from them. He's taken their minds from them. And he has literally destroyed their lives.
And the man at the center of this strange story, a grandfatherly professional landscaper by the name of Arvin Shreve, a 61-year-old gardener and self-professed prophet of God, leader of a secretive polygamous group called the Zionist Society, best known for its blossoming gardens and a bevy of young female followers.
Well, the leader of the Zion Society, Arvin Shreve, didn't just appear grandfatherly. He was a grandfather, and he allowed his own grandchildren to be abused. Now, our next guest, Natalie, was born into the Zion Society. She is the granddaughter of the admitted mastermind behind this evil. Natalie experienced an entirely different form of manipulation, brainwashing, and abuse than the other girls. Abuse so horrific, she claims to this day, her own mother doesn't even believe her.
I am Arvin Shreve's granddaughter. In the cult, appearances were very important and perfection was very important. So the more beautiful we were, the closer we were to God. The goal was a certain weight. I've obviously always been a chubby kid. And I remember my mother also has that sort of metabolism. And she lived on carrot juice and ran 5 miles a day. We were told that God can't reach you through layers of fat. There was a manual that taught us specifically how to please a man with sexually explicit instructions. There are such various spectrum of abuse that happened. So some of it was who showed me pictures to who actually touched me or made me touch them. Sex was very normalized. I don't ever remember not being around it. I watched family members fornicating. We watched porn often. It was very much put forward to us as this is fun, this is godlike, this is spiritual. I would see my sisters sitting on like my grandfather's lap. I watched my cousin be touched by and be kissed by my grandpa. When I was 8 years old, my mother left and took me with her a couple of months before the group was raided, and she told me to never speak about the place again.
Well, Natalie, thank you for being here and talking about this. Did you two know each other?
She was really young. She doesn't remember me.
Okay, but do you remember her?
No, I remember Dawn Moore, her sister.
Natalie, you say that you were taught that God told you that you need to be beautiful, you need to be perfect, and this was a standard to which you and the others were held.
Yes. Oftentimes people would get weighed every morning, or, a lot of, I was told that I wouldn't be assigned a sister council until I lost my baby fat, kind of thing. Like I wouldn't be wanted by a man, or a husband wouldn't find me attractive until that happened. And so we would be weighed, even as 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds.
Your relationship with your mom.
Yeah.
You say to this day, she doesn't admit to consciousness. She won't acknowledge everything that went on.
No, she believes that most of the children were coerced by the police to say what they said or about what happened to them. And when I would try to talk to her about what happened to me, she would say, that's not physically possible. Children can't do that to each other. Little boys can't physically do that. And so, she mostly accused me of lying.
So you told her that you were sexually abused, raped as a child, abused in this way, and she just doesn't believe you.
Exactly.
Do you have a relationship with her?
No, not very much.
So your grandfather was arrested, sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, and then a lot of other of those in power started coming forward and confessing.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think?
I was happy that I felt validated.
Both of you have referred to a handbook or instructions about how to please a man, how to look right, how to do right. Did you see this handbook?
Yes.
Was this something that people taught out of to you?
Usually the patriarch or the matriarch of that family would teach you out of the handbook and, make you do what you had to do.
And you always had to wear a dress.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have an assigned color?
I did. It was red.
Well, coming up, children in the Zion Society were encouraged to play games like Rape in the Dark. I'm serious. Rape in the Dark, and perform dances and skits that they were told were just innocent fun, but were all really just a thinly veiled cover for the sexual abuse of children. More victims are going to join us and talk about that when we come back.
We were taught that no one outside of our group would understand what we did.
I vaguely remember a game called Rape in the Dark. You got to be it, but you were the rapist.
Closed captioning provided by the leader of the Zion Society may have died behind bars, but the trauma he inflicted lives on. The children he victimized are now grown women, and they are brave enough, strong enough, and determined enough that they did everything in their power to be here today, despite very long journeys and intense COVID testing. Now, Dawn and Anessa wanted to be here in person with Amber and Natalie in hopes that it will help others. Take a look.
I am the oldest grandchild of Arvin Shreve. The outside world referred to us as the Zionist Society. It was an end-of-days cult. We were preparing for the coming of Christ and the end of the world. I didn't really feel scared because we were touted to be the chosen people and we'd be safe.
Us girls were groomed to be sexual with the adult males.
It was the women that sexualized us at very, very young ages.
There was a time that they had us learning and performing sexual acts on other young girls. We were taught that one man can't necessarily take care of and please every woman. There was a lot of adults participating in sexual activities that we got to watch.
I do remember one time where one of the adults read us a little short story about teenage girls making out, and me and a few other girls, as well as this adult, would act it out. I vaguely remember a game called Rape in the Dark. You got to be it, but you were the rapist.
We were taught that no one outside of our group would understand what we did. They weren't close enough to God to be able to understand the concepts that we practiced and believed. My parents were a part of this group for its religious aspect. However, they were never involved with the sexual aspect of things. During the trials of those who were convicted, my mom got to listen to the stories of the sexual acts that happened. And she spoke of many times of walking out of that courtroom and throwing up.
It's hard knowing that the man that was supposed to be your grandfather chose instead to be a monster.
Well, joining us now are Dawn and Anessa, along with survivor Andrea, who is also joining us virtually. So, Andrea, thank you for joining us. Guys, you've been listening to everything we've been talking about so far. These experiences sound absolutely horrific, like these games and that sort of thing. But then I realized that at the time that this is happening, you have nothing to compare this to, correct?
It was completely normalized. Everybody there was doing it. All of the children played the games together. It just was life. There was no reason to think that something was wrong.
How did this, for you, strike a contrast where you learned this is a cult, this is a bad thing?
The majority of it came after the raid when everything fell apart. There was one instance that I remember specifically when they had us performing sexual acts on other young girls, younger than me, and I was one of the older of the children. And I remember realizing at that point that something didn't feel right.
Just something in your soul told you this just can't be right.
Correct.
Andrea, you say you were abused weekly or multiple times a week.
For me, it was directly related to how much I weighed. I was weighed every single day. And if we had like a 3 to 5 pound weight range, and if I got over 108, then I was, going to hell, and I wouldn't get called to go have sex. Then you didn't feel special. Then you knew you were going to go to hell. So it was tough. But yeah, it was on a daily to weekly basis for sure. And I was there for 5 years.
They had it set up where you were motivated to be raped because
Absolutely.
that was your ticket to heaven.
Absolutely.
That is a demented, sick system of logic that is pushed on to children whose minds are so malleable. Coming up, the women reunite for the first time in person with the former detective who they credit with taking down the Zion Society that stole their childhoods. We'll be right back.
Arvin Shreve was a sexual pervert and a deviant who was predatory against children. Based on the initial evidence, there were more than 4,000 counts of sexual assault against the children based on their testimony.
Closed captioning provided by...
So this is the house where Arvin Shreve lived. That bottom window right there is where I was raped several times growing up. And then across the street, right here, this is the house that I lived in. The lingerie shows were like up in this living room right here. So surreal.
Well, that was Amber and Dawn returning to the compound they called home for many years of their childhood. They sent that video to Mike King, a man they credit with saving dozens of other children like themselves. In 1991, Mike was a detective in Utah, and this case just came across his desk. It has haunted him for 3 decades, including up till today.
I served as the lead investigator of the Zion Society cult, and I led a team of 70 officers one morning in the raid of 10 homes in a northern Utah subdivision. This was an incredibly complex case that involved over 100 adults and 32 children who were being victimized daily. We found semi-automatic weapons in secure places. The cult leader, Arvin Shreve, fled the scene, but he was captured a week later, about 300 miles away from Salt Lake. Arvin Shreve was reported to be a former member of the Latter-day Saint faith. What he really was a sexual pervert and a deviant who was predatory against children. Based on the initial evidence, there were more than 4,000 counts of sexual assault against the children based on their testimony.
Who taught about the sexual rape?
Over the course of the following year, 12 individuals were charged and found guilty of sexual crimes against children. Arvin Shreve was sent to prison for 20 years to life. Eventually, he died in 2009. I am really looking forward to seeing these kids. It's been 30 years, and there's never been a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about them. No child should have to go through what they went through. And they are the true heroes because they survived and they beat this guy.
Well, former Detective Mike King joined us now. He's the owner of an investigative firm called Profiling Evil and host of the YouTube show of the same name. He's working on a book about his experience, and it's called Profiling Evil, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Wow.
So I know that we have to be socially distanced here, but can y'all all see Mike?
I'm just going to back up a little.
You at least step up a little and say hi.
There, I'll just say hi. Hi.
This is punishing to not be able to hug these beautiful girls.
I'm sure the same for them as well. So, Mike, this came across your desk 30 years ago. What did you think when you first read these accounts?
Holy cow, Doc, I was a property crimes investigator. I was running an undercover sting operation, and this incredibly brave woman walked in to the office and said, "Do you have a minute to talk to me? I've been involved in a cult that's sexually abusing children." And I tried to act casual, like I hear this every day.
Yeah.
And that launched us into one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had.
How did this affect you personally?
I was incensed. I don't know how any investigator doesn't associate with things they're experiencing in their own life anyway. I looked at my children who were similar in age. I couldn't imagine that this was even possible, that a parent would do this to a child. It just didn't seem possible, Doc.
After Shreve was caught, arrested, and imprisoned, then people started coming forward, supposedly at his direction.
We were fortunate in getting a full confession from him. The appeal that this would avoid the embarrassment of this going out, the fact that we had physical evidence, we had eyewitness testimony. I mean, we had solid cases against these people. And so for him to say to them, go in and confess, was a way to minimize what might happen in the public eye.
Next, the prosecutor who handled this case says when his office finally got enough evidence to remove the children, he could tell they were trained not to speak. Well, they're speaking now. They're not silent anymore, and we're going to meet him when we come back.
Cults are happening today. This happened 30 years ago, so it's in my past. But there are groups and sects and communes and cults gathering today right under our noses, right here in America.
Whenever I read or see on the news stories about cult-like situations, it tears me up inside because I wonder what the people on the inside are really going through. Whenever you are that cut off from the world, it's a recipe for abuse.
How do you guys feel about this gentleman right here that has done all of this work to bring this about?
We love Mike.
Very grateful.
We
couldn't be more grateful to him because who knows where we would have ended up had he not done what he did and what our life would have been like.
3 years, what would that have looked like for us?
As we said, this ultimately wound up with the prosecutor, and the prosecutor who handled this case says groups like this are difficult to crack. Former Weber County Attorney Reed Richards, who's joining us now virtually from Utah. Reed, thank you for being here.
It's good to be with you.
You guys worked really hard to piece this thing together.
Mike worked on it full time. I spent a considerable amount of time working on the case. There were some challenges involved here that normal cases would not have. Arvin Shreve was a very well-known person in our community. It was mentioned that he was a landscape architect. He actually did the landscaping and land maintenance around the city-county building and the courthouse. So he was very close to the judges, to the prosecuting office. All those people knew him. All the city officials knew him. And so to charge him with something, you had to be sure you had the evidence, because it was unbelievable the things that we were being told were happening.
Additionally, this group had purchased all of the houses in this area, which kind of made it into a compound. So they had control over that. So it wasn't like you could just kind of walk in to an isolated house. The whole neighborhood was involved in this, right?
And so it really took people that were in the group coming out to talk before we really had the information we needed to be able to take action.
Yeah, and you did find a stash of weapons and stuff hidden and buried away in certain parts of different houses and on property, right?
We'd heard that they had guns stashed. We'd had threats made to people who've tried to go into the group to investigate, private investigator types. So to avoid those kind of problems and having it erupt into a mass disaster, we organized, and Mike was the lead in this, organized a group of police officers, a large number, I think it was something like 70 police officers and CPS workers, Child Protective Service workers, that went in early in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, and went into 10 of the houses, the main 10 houses that were involved, and secured the location before there could be any disruption.
These are some of the strongest women I've ever met, and despite their childhood trauma, they have each found their own way to heal. Amber has found a way to actually find humor in her pain, for example. We'll talk about where these women are now, where their lives are now, when we come back.
Hi, just like most of you, I was raised in a polygamous cult. And polygamy, for those of you who don't know what it is, polygamy is one dad and a whole bunch of moms. One Ken doll and a whole bunch of broken Barbies.
Closed captioning provided by one of the things that I find most impressive is that all 5 of you have found a way to overcome what has really been developmentally disruptive in your life. I wrote down some things that each of you said. You know, Amber, you're now an entertainer, stand-up comedian. You say, my life is flourishing. I want to advocate for those that are still in groups like these and for the little girl that I once was. And Dawn, by the time the 5th grade was over, I had a best friend and I liked my teacher, which helped acclimate me. And Natalie, my past has given me a successful writing career. I'm very even-tempered and I handle things as they come. And Anessa, these kind of cults can happen anywhere. I have not told my children what I experienced, but perhaps I will many years from now when the time is right. And Andrea, the transition into the real world was rough, but eventually I learned to have a somewhat normal life. I chose to write my graduating thesis on why people join cults. I really admire all 5 of you for what you've done. So God bless you all. I want to thank all of my guests for being here today and sharing their stories. By sharing what they went through here today, they're showing other victims of abuse that they are not alone. I also want to give a special thanks to Mike King, who after 30 years helped orchestrate all of these survivors coming together. So thank you very much for that. Listen, don't forget to check out Profiling Evil on YouTube and his book, Profiling Evil, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult. Now that will be out in the spring. You can pre-order it now, but we'll remind you of it at the right time. For more information about today's show, log on to drphil.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe to Robin's podcast, I've Got a Secret. She talks about a lot of stuff that really matters. So, guys, thank all of y'all for being here. Mike, thank you for being here. And Reed, thanks for taking the time to talk about prosecuting this very, very important case. We'll see you next time.